Good morning and a very warm welcome again to Knightswood Congregational Church. We are seeing what we think is light at the end of the tunnel, and we just hope it's not a fast approaching train. But if people behave themselves and we don't see the results of, we don't see the scenes set in Bournemouth and in Kelvingrove Park in Glasgow, we might be working our way towards phase 3 and the opening of the church in a limited fashion at some point. Now, obviously, there will be lots of rules and regulations when we do open the church, and it won't be the same as before, and it shouldn't be the same as before because we are taking in physical distancing into account. Rules and regulations just seem to be what we are living by just now. And I often think the church is a wee bit like that. The church of old that I grew up in, well, put it this way, I remember at the very tender age of, I think, primary one, maybe even beforehand, being in the Sunday school, and I will name the church because it's my priority to do so, my privilege to do so. It was Gairbraid Parish Church, and I was in the Sunday school, and I remember the classroom, and I was sitting on a desk, and I happened to touch the curtains. That's all I've done. I can remember it clearly, and I can remember the curtains as well. I touched the curtains, and I only touched them perhaps twice. I think they were actually distracting me and being in my way. Maybe I was leaning against the wall, I don't know. But I remember the curtains being touched, and I remember that I was asked to leave Sunday school because these were the rules, that you didn't touch the curtain. The person who took the Sunday school was, and nowadays you wouldn't let them near children. They weren't a paedophile, they just weren't suited to be with children. There's no doubt in my mind that rules form a part of organised religion. They have since the beginning of time. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why the rules are kind of, churches are shrinking in size. Especially those rules that were rooted in the deep past. I mean, I can remember when you had to go to church, you had to wear formal clothes. I mean, in my church, previous church in Airdrie, most of the men were of a generation that they still wore a shirt and tie every Sunday. And there was one other church down in Coatbridge when they had communion that the gentlemen of the church all wore stripes and tails, and the ladies wore stripes and a black jacket. It was such a formal occasion that they had to go out and buy these special clothes that really are the privy of funeral directors. I also remember that you daren't go into a church without having some sort of form of monetary offering. It wasn't an option, it was we will collect it off you. And of course, certain seats, that's my seat, you can't sit there, or you can't sit in that seat because that belongs to the Jones family, or the Taylor family, or the Wilson family. And that may be when it was days going back to when people did pay a pew rental within certain denominations. And of course, there was never any applause during a church service. That would be something that you just wouldn't do. But then I can go back even further to when those list of things were even more substantial that you couldn't do. I can remember when certain churches in mainstream denominations in Scotland discouraged strongly dancing. It was the work of the devil. Women weren't allowed to wear trousers under any situation at all. Some churches had it that women were not allowed entry without a hat. No unmarried and single mothers were really welcome, certainly not for baptism. And there was very limited role for women in the church other than to make the tea and the coffee and serve cakes that they had baked at home. So when Jesus says the words, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest," We find that in Matthew 11, chapter 28, which you should have heard on in the church service planner. He was talking about his idea, I think, of spirituality. Yes, spirituality. Over and against the spirituality that was being preached by the priests and the Pharisees at the time. He was going above and beyond those lawmakers who like to oppose and bring in laws and tell you what you could and couldn't do. And being religious in the first century Judea meant that you had to observe the purity laws, which included over 600 plus laws of Moses, as well as hundreds more that were added by the religious leaders, the Pharisees. The Pharisees especially would load their followers down with commandment, rules and expectations to a point where people really could not possibly keep up with them. Can you imagine how that must have been a burden to some people's conscience? They must have lived in a constant fear of guilt. The idea that of religion, and I wonder that's where sometimes we get our bad press from, advocates observance of rules as a path to salvation. It's all too common. And it still prevails in some elements of Christianity and in society. Jesus advocated for a vastly different kind of spirituality, one that was not based on fulfilling the law, but one that was grounded in God's love and God's huge compassion for each and every one of us. And that's why grace, forgiveness, love and compassion are recurring words in Jesus' sermons. While the Pharisees, they emphasised theological words such as obedience, duty, sin, punishment, and of course, condemnation. And we love a bit of condemnation from time to time in the Christian church, don't we? Jesus did not negate the validity of the law. However, he had a different approach. And he once said in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, the Sabbath was made for humankind and not humankind for the Sabbath. In other words, the law was created for us. It was created to be a benefit to us. It was established so that we could be guided to a good, happy and fulfilled life. And we're not supposed to serve and slave under the law in Jesus' theology. That's not what the idea about it is. Because in this context, where I'm coming from today, Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find the rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus' audience was familiar with spiritual yokes. The opponents of Jesus had made wearing their spiritual yoke a heavy, demanding, draining burden. Yes, Jesus' first audience knew what it meant to wear a yoke, and it was not an easy task. And so Jesus' words could certainly have gotten the people's attention. What does he mean when he said, my yoke is easy? How can a yoke ever be easy? Now, to explain what a yoke is. In the first century Judea, when farmers brought a team of oxen to the yoke maker, he would spend a good deal of time measuring their height, their width, and the gap between the two animals. It was a piece of wood that went across and attached to both the animals' backs in order that they could attach a plough or whatever at the back. And then he would go to work. And a week later, he would gently place the yoke over the shoulders of the oxen, and he would watch for the rough places, and eventually he would smooth it until perfectly it fitted the oxen, so that the burden of pulling wasn't irritated and wasn't weighed down. And for the oxen, the yoke was then easy. And that's the kind of yoke that Jesus offers us, one that fits, one that makes the tasks of life, everyday life, so much easier. A good fitting yoke is a great tool, and it can make heavy burdens manageable. that kind of yoke is helpful in consideration and in contradiction to the yoke that the Pharisees were imposing upon their people. So Jesus' idea of religion is one that should be helpful to us. It should be guiding us, and it should help us remove the burden in our lives. It should not become a burden in addition to the hardships of life. We already have hardships. Why do we need the church? Why do we need religion to add to those hardships? So when you enter, hopefully, any church of Jesus, you should be greeted with love, you should be greeted with grace, and you should hopefully be greeted with forgiveness. For in Jesus' church, you will find rest and inner peace. There's no need to carry the heavy burden of guilt, no need at all, because you're accepted for who you are. You're somebody important. And that's where you'll find the guidance in life. You will find the joy of God's presence and the experience of love between brothers and sisters. And we're sadly missing that just now. But there you will find the higher purpose that God has placed on your life. And you will be fitted with a yoke that helps you to carry out your calling, your business in life, so that you can help to make this world a better place. Indeed, that is Jesus' idea of religion. That's why his yoke is easy indeed. So Jesus is inviting each and every one of us this morning too, saying, "Come, take my yoke upon you." And hopefully you'll find that it fits exactly. May God bless you and your family and your household at this time. Amen.